Hi, everybody. Lovely to see. Oh, look, there's some familiar faces on the top row there. I don't know how Zoom decides who goes on the top row. There's a few of you I see every time. Lovely to see you all. I think we've pretty much got everyone in now. So I'm Laura. I'm from John Arbon Textiles. You might have seen me already a few times. And with us today, we've got Faye Dashper-Hughes. Hi, Faye.
Yeah.
And Faye is going to be doing the 10 best crochet hacks for beginners, but also for not quite beginners and also for knitters, I hear. So it should be really exciting. I'm very much in a crochet phase at the moment, so I'm looking forward to learning some new things and maybe some old things and some new ways to do some old things. I can see people are getting involved in the chat already. That's really exciting. We have muted everyone. So just basically so that you can hear me and Faye really clearly. So if you want to say anything, pop it in the chat and we'll pick it up from there. Other things, just Zoom things we always have to say is we're recording this. That's just so that we can put it out on YouTube later for people who couldn't be here today. And we've got the captions turned on. So if you struggle to hear what we're saying, or if you just need it written out to help you, go find the captions. These are all sort of along the bottom of your screen or the top of your screen, wherever you find them on your device. There's lots of people, quite a few from the UK this time. Maybe it's night time now in other places around the world. Oh no, there we go. Someone in the USA. Hello to you. Always lovely to see people from around the world joining in. Um, right, I'm going to hand over to Faye. If you have got any burning questions, pop them in the chat, but we might keep most of them till the end because I think a lot of them will get answered by Faye just through her presentation. So it might be something that will actually just come up naturally later on. But anything that isn't, we'll keep an eye on it and we'll make sure we cover it towards the end of the chat. Right, without further ado, I'm going to make Faye nice and big on everyone's screen and we'll be excited to learn everything. Over to you, Faye.
Hello, everybody. I am now suddenly incredibly nervous, and I'm going to try my hardest not to be sick and actually just deliver a really good workshop for you. I've seen loads of friendly faces in there. Thank you, everybody, for joining. And I just saw somebody, Nadia says, is coming in from Maryland in the US saying, I need some crochet friends. You have an entire Zoom room full of them today. I don't know where all of your levels of expertise are at, but hopefully some of the bits you might already know that I'm going to go through. Some of them might be completely new to you. Some of them might just be a little bit of a different take on how you already crochet. These are like the top 10 tips, and there might be a few more of them, that I wish I'd known when I started crocheting and designing. I'm like a smidge out of 10 years of crocheting and designing. And the minute I picked up a hook, I was absolutely smitten with crochet. And I have a really inquisitive brain, so I tend to not just believe the received wisdom about crochet, and I question everything. So the 10 tips I'm giving you are really based on the things that I'm like, are you sure that's the right way to go about that? Because I won't just believe what people tell me. I will go and investigate those things and make sure that that is how I think it should be as well. So that's what these top 10 tips are based on. And also the thing to recognise possibly is I am a huge advocate for crocheting with wool and have been from day one. Like I'm wearing wool, I crochet in wool. I just love working with wool and crochet, which sometimes isn't talked about enough. I find that crochet is an underdog in the crafting sphere, and crocheting with wool is like another step removed. So I always try and advocate for wool and crochet and pushing this beautiful craft forward. Right, let's crack on. I have promised you 10 top tips. We might get through more of them. Some of them are very quick fire and some of them will take a little bit longer. In the chat, Helena, who's behind the scenes, she's going to add some links for us. So all of the information I'm talking about today, I already have in a pre-prepared blog post for you. Some of the bits will just talk about the tip themselves. Some of them will link out to photo tutorials or blog posts or video posts. So don't worry if you can't take in all of this information now. We've got links out to you so you can go to this at your own pace as well. I've really tried to make all that information available to you. Let's crack on. So I'm going to do some Izzy Wizzy. Get ready for this. Ready? We move to my hands, and even better.
Wow.
And you can see my face. You lucky things. Right, let's start. I'm assuming that some of you may have only just picked up a crochet hook. And so my first top tip is there is no right way to hold a crochet hook. I tend to find that whatever way you would go to pick up a pencil or a pen, with your left-handed, right-handed, whatever feels most comfortable in your hand is the right way for you to hold your crochet hook. And there are no crochet police. So if somebody ever tells you that you are holding your crochet in the wrong way, they don't get the right to tell you that. So I crochet in quite a different manner in that I hold my hook and my yarn in my right hand. I'm a right-handed user, and so this is how I crochet, and it is really quite different from the way that a lot of other people crochet. Now, if you are new to crochet but you're a knitter, if you are a continental knitter, you might find it a lot easier, let's say you're right-handed, to keep the yarn tension in your left hand. However you would do it for your knitting, apply the exact same thinking to your crochet. For me, although I was a crocheter first, I am a flicker knitter. So I actually find it a lot easier for me to just crochet in this manner, but you just do whatever is comfortable in your hands. Do not be told by anybody else that you're doing it the wrong way. And I have come across a lot of crocheters over the years that have given up on crochet because they were told off by maybe a grandparent and told that they're doing it the wrong way. There's no wrong way, whatever is comfortable for you. Top tip number one, if you're a flicker and you haven't been used to crocheting, you can't get quite used to holding it in your left hand, swap it out to your right. And you can see that I kind of almost drop my crochet hook. And for that purpose, I stick to these little thin aluminium ones because they're a lot lighter, so I'm not dragging down when I drop that crochet hook. Tip number one. Let's swap out. Tip number two is about slip knots. So when you start a slip knot, it can be tempting to use the yarn end to pull through. I'm just going to show you how I do it. And it's not the technique of how I wrap it around my thumb that is important. It's the fact that I am using, I pop my yarn bowl, it is my working yarn, which is one that is attached to my cake of yarn, that I am pulling up and through my loop. And what that does is means I can actually tension it onto my hook, and that then remains as a loop. If I do it the other way around and use my yarn tail rather than my working yarn, and this is such a simple tip, but I promise you it really makes a difference to your result. Let me just do a couple of chains and show you what can happen. So if I've used the yarn tail rather than the working yarn, I can pull that loop into nothing and it disappears. If you do it with your working yarn, you can't do that because you've got tension on it, and that first chain will always match the tension of the rest of your chain. It's such a simple tip, and it is one that I learned about 2 years ago, 8 years into my crochet journey. It's such a simple thing, and it's a massive game changer. Works for knitting as well. It's not just for crochet, it will work for knitting, and any other slip knot you use, always use your, if you can, use your working yarn rather than your tail yarn. I told you there were some quick fire ones coming through.
Yeah. Bang, bang, bang.
Bang, bang, bang. Here's the next one. So I am using, let's say I'm using a 4.5 mil hook for the work that I'm on. If I was to use that for my starting chain as well, then it can create quite a tight starting chain that doesn't have a lot of give with it, and that can affect the attention on your first couple of rows or rounds. Instead, I'm going to move up 0.5 millimeter on my hook. Hands up, I'm sure some of you might have done this. I know I have in the past, where I've thought, I'll just create my chains really loosely and it will be okay. And what you end up with are some really, like some tighter, some looser, and that in turn affects your kind of first and second rows or rounds. And a much easier way to do it is to basically move up 0.5 millimeter, and then for every single chain that you are creating, you're getting the same size of chain. You're not trying to guesstimate it. You just get some really nice, neat chains that are worked, that make them much easier to work your next row into. And also, if you come round to add a trim or a border to them, you've got that extra space ready to work into for the trim or the border. This is, again, such a simple thing, but it makes a real difference, and it can make a difference to your knitting. You can start with your cast on, go up 0.5 mil, and then change out to your next set of needles if you need it. Tip number 3, done. I did say we'd have some speedy ones, and then we'll have some much slower ones. Let me just add a few more foundation chains into this, and then I can show you, because I want to talk about the anatomy of a foundation chain. Right, let's make sure that we can see this all the way. It's a little bit blurry. There we go. So let me just get my hook so I can show this to you. A foundation chain is made up of 3 bumps, essentially. You've got your front loop here, you've got your back loop here, which is most likely what you were taught to work into when you learned to crochet, or if you learned on YouTube. But if you flip that foundation chain over, coming right down this middle, almost like a spine, you've got what you would call the back lump, a back bump, or sometimes it can be called the third loop. And what I would actually do is encourage you to start your stitches into that back bump instead. If I just do a couple, and then I'm going to swap out to a swatch that I've already got started, and you can see, so I've turned them upside down, and it can be a little bit more finicky to get your hook into, but I find it easier if I just use my nail to push it over and get in. So rather than going through front loop and back loop on the stitch, on the foundation chain, I'm just going through that back bump. And there, and I make my stitch. If I do one more, so I've just flipped over my chain, I'm going into that third loop, that back bump, and I'm making my stitch. And what that's done is created my front loop and my back loop, and they just sit at the bottom of my swatch. And let me show you what that actually looks like.
I think it's going to look lovely and neat, Faye.
It is. It's exactly what it does. So what it does is it means there's my foundation chain. That is then mimicking exactly what the top of my work looks like. And it's such a simple swap out, but it really makes a difference, not just to the look of your work, but also, again, if I was coming back in to add a trim to this, or to add a border, it's so simple to count those stitches down at the bottom. You don't get that same effect if you use the front loop and the back loop. And also, it's got a decent amount of stretch to it as well. But I know for sure there's a stitch that I would be working into if I am adding a trim or a border into that foundation chain. It's just a much easier way of identifying it. It looks much neater. And although it is a little bit more finicky to begin with, your overall finish is a lot nicer and a lot easier to add extra bits into.
Yeah.
Tip number 4, done.
I think the first row into the chain is always a bit fiddly, isn't it? Because your chain is all twisted and funny. So, but I love that. It makes it look much better as well.
If you do that combination of moving up 0.5 mil and working into the back bump. That 1/2 mil in the back bump really makes a massive difference. And those two things together, they just elevate your crochet. And hopefully all of the things that I'm talking about today will just nudge your crochet style up that little bit further. And that's what I'm up. I love to see finessed crochet. I love crochet to be taken seriously and to offer these types of tips that people can go, oh, that's how I can just move it up a notch.
Yeah.
So they're my top tips for foundation chains and how to get that really lovely polished finish to it, basically. We are now moving on to another tip that I've got. So normally you wouldn't leave this, if I hide that bit, that's my working yarn, you wouldn't leave this length of a tail on your swatch or on your work because that would just be a waste of yarn. However, I can only see a few of you, but Laura, maybe you'll be able to tell me if people put their hands up. Hands up if you have ever thought, of course I'll remember what hook size I have used on my project, and then you've walked away from that project for days, weeks, months, and then you've stolen the crochet hook out of that project bag for another project. And yeah, I'm seeing some hands up.
Yeah,
Even here,
I can
like,
see some my hands up. I've
yeah,
forgotten.
thank you. But at the time, you're like, I'll remember that was a 5mm hook. Of course I will. Okay, so I have two top tips for you on this one. Number one, give yourself 30 centimeters worth of tail on your swatch or on your project. So basically a ruler's length. I am using, let me swap this out for this hook. So this is a 4.5mm hook. Down at the bottom of the tail, I would simply just add in 4 knots. 1, 2, and I want them to be spaced out if I can, which sometimes is a little more difficult than you think. Oh, that one won't do it. You can imagine what I'm up to though, and this is why you need the 30 centimeters. So for every one and the whole number, I am adding a knot into that extra long yarn tail. So if I had a 3mm hook, I would add 3 knots down at the bottom. I need one more because I have a 4mm hook. And then this is a constant reference. What I would encourage you, like, first of all, please be a swatcher and do this into your swatch, because if you then ever go back and use that yarn and the same stitch, you've recorded this information directly on your swatch and you don't have to keep it in a record anywhere else. Now, I have got 4 knots, which tells me that this is a 4mm hook. If I then leave a nice bit of space and added 2 more knots, then that's 1 for each of the 0.25 decimal points that I've got. There's 1, and here's 2. So I then have a lovely little knotted record of the fact that I have used a 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.25, 4.5mm hook in my swatch. Done.
Wow. It's like you've made it into a little abacus, Faye.
Yes, it is a little feely abacus for remembering where it is. I do a lot of crochet outside of the house. I'm often here, then everywhere. I am snatching crochet time wherever I can, and this just keeps me on the straight and narrow. I do have another top tip for you though, which is to also start a WhatsApp group with somebody who doesn't care about a WhatsApp group. So mine is with my husband. We have a WhatsApp group which is called Woolly Shiz. He never needs to respond to it, and I just send him probably 4 times a day, roll 47, 54.6 grams, 7mm hook. He never needs to respond. And top tip, if you have somebody in your life that you can start a WhatsApp group with, they can even take themselves out of that WhatsApp group and you can still keep on adding to it. And it is your nice little notebook that gives you a passage of time that shows you where you are in a project, how many grams you've used, what your hook size is, what it's called. It's all there. I don't know how many times I leave the house without a notebook, without a pencil and pen, but I always have my phone with me.
Yeah.
I always have this with me, and that WhatsApp group I've done this for about the last 18 months, and it's the best thing I've ever done. And Matthew, my lovely husband, does not care. He just like ignore sometimes because he loves it. He will have to go in and not read them, but just he likes to have a double blue tick on things, which is hilarious. Somebody else is saying they use notes on their phone, whatever works for you, but I promise you, you're more likely to have your phone on you than you are to have like a notepad and pen. And the reason that I use WhatsApp is because I know that if I was using notes, I would call it some random thing and not be able to find it, or I would have 3 different notes apps because I'm always looking for the best thing. Whereas if it's WhatsApp, I've used WhatsApp for years, and that is the place that I always go to. So if I'm being really good, I use this knotted method and I put it in WhatsApp because I'm horrendous at recording information at times. Sometimes I'm really good and I have the best Excel spreadsheets known to people, and other times I just forget to record all of the stuff. So knots are good, and the reason for adding more space to this is if you're not doing it on your swatch, but you're doing it on your work. If I wasn't kind of under pressure doing this here with you now, my knots would be further down and a bit neater, and I would still have left myself 10 centimeters to weave in the end afterwards, because if you're done with that yarn, done with that project, then you can still weave in that end. So hence make it 30 centimeters, leave yourself an end to weave in, but still have a note of where you're up to at the beginning of your project. Lots of people loving the WhatsApp tip. It's a really good one. And again, like I only started doing that 18 months ago. So it shows you the stuff that I'm learning, I'm still learning, and has made it to my top tip. And in fact, one of my top tips, if we get to it, I only learned last month and it was a game changer for me. So hopefully we'll get to that one too. Right, we are on to top tip number 6. And I want this 5mm hook. And let me just pull out a couple of stitches, because I think I made some when I was nervously chatting with you to begin with, and my hands are a bit shaky and my tension might not be the best. So this one doesn't matter how long you've been crocheting for. You might have been crocheting for a couple of days or 20 years. But there are 3 types of crocheters. You have got a yanker who will create really tight stitches. You have got a lifter who will create really loose stitches, and then you've got a rider. And as I typed up the blog post element for this today, I was comparing it to the 3 bears basically. Mommy bear is the tight one, and basically what that means is when you put your hook through the stitch and you pull up that loop, you're keeping it really far down. And what that means is that relative to your fabric, your hook is pointing down the ways. That is keeping this loop really tight, and it means everything else that you do with that stitch is keeping it short and tight, and that is why you've got tight tension. Whether you're making a double crochet, a half treble crochet, I love this. I can't see your name. Let me just, Lou, your animated face is telling me everything that I need to know about the fact that you don't know this stuff about crochet, which is fabulous. Keep it up, because you're giving me great feedback on whether you know these top tips or not. Love it. That is what is creating tight crochet. Basically, you're yanking this yarn on what we would call, it's like the golden loop. So basically you will have done, if I show this on a half treble, you've done a yarn over, you're putting your hook through the stitch. This yarn over is your golden loop, because when you pull that through, that is setting the scene for the height of your stitch. So if you're a yanker, you're then pulling on that golden loop and you're keeping your stitch really small and really tight. If you are a lifter, once you've done that yarn over, you're lifting it the complete opposite way, and you're lifting it all the way up, and your crochet hook looks like it's heading up a mountain. If you're an anchor, it's heading down the mountain. If you're a lifter, it's heading up the mountain. Let me show the difference that makes. If I do a yarn over and I pull through all 3 stitches, can you see how tall that stitch is by comparison? So if you are a lifter, you are loosey-goosey, probably always struggling to get the right tension compared to the designer's pattern. You're getting really tall very open, lacy texture crochet, and you've got a lot more drape than probably the pattern intended. So the anchors have got tight fabric and you're not getting the drapes that the pattern wants. The lifters are getting really loosey-goosey tension and it really floppy fabric, which again is probably not what the designer is trying to get you to. And the way around it is that ideally what you want is for your hook to be parallel with your work as you pull up that golden loop. Now, because of the way that I crochet it slightly differently, I kind of almost crochet on the vertical. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to show you what that looks like for me. Let me pull out those last 2 stitches because I don't want them to affect my tension. So I'm doing a yarn over, hook through, there's my golden loop. I'm pulling up that loop and I'm pulling it up a little, but only so that it's actually parallel to my work. I'm doing a yarn over and I'm pulling through all 3 stitches, and that is giving me really lovely even tension. If you are consistently going to a pattern and you are not getting row and round tension, this is why, and just check whether your placement is heading down the hill or up the hill, and that's how you rectify it. You want a lovely flat path that you're going along with your crochet. That's the best way that I can say it. This is baby bear. Your porridge is just the right temperature if you're doing this, basically. This is what you want. This is what will give you what is closest to a designer. If you're working from a designer's pattern, I would hope that they have put the work in to be what this is called a rider. So they should have put the work in to be a rider crocheter, to have really good even tension across all of their work, so that if you are also a rider, you should be able to, for sure, get at least stitch gauge and hopefully row or round gauge as well. It makes quite a difference. So if you're going to go and look at the blog post, once we get on the back of this, because I've seen Jill, hi Jill, you've just mentioned it, I will put in some better photography on what the golden loop is across double crochet, half treble crochet and treble crochet, but that might be a tomorrow morning job, so check back on that one. But yeah, this is what really makes a difference to your tension, and if you can crack this and be like a horizontal rider, that's how you're going to more likely get tension with the pattern designer. It took me a long time. I used to be a really tight yanker crocheter, and when I realised what was going on, I probably spent 2 to 3 months just checking my tension every couple of rows. If it feels like it's getting tight, and you'll know because your hook will really struggle to get through, then I would just rip it out and go back again. And that method of just going at it again and again, like, pulled me into be a decent tensioned crocheter. And I double checked my tension from a pattern from 6 years ago, last year, and my tension was spot on. So I know that I'm consistently able to get the right tension through being a rider, basically. It hasn't changed at all over the years. Right, that one is done. We're on to tip number 7, which is, let me swap out to a slightly different swatch, and actually let me grab this one as well. Let me grab this back. It can be a little inviting to get all the notions ever when you're a crafter, because they're so beautiful and lovely, but actually the humble bulb pin is the best stitch marker you can ever come across, and let me show you why. It's really lightweight. It can be quickly stuck into your crochet or your knitting. It works for crochet and for knitting, so across multiple crafts. And also you get them in lots of different colours, and quite often you get them on clothing, so they are free of charge, which, you know, I'm Scottish, I love free things. And the reason I'm pointing to the colour is if you can get yourself a green one, and mine is pink today because I can't find my red one, and usually instead of white I would have an orange one. I basically use it as a traffic light system. So green is my first stitch on a right side row. So green is good to go, Right side row, very easy to identify. Pink or red is the first stitch on my wrong side row. So I can always go straight to my crochet and say, I know exactly where I'm at. I know that if I'm there and my pink stitch mark or red is on the right hand side, I know instantly that I am working on a wrong side row, and it's really easy for me to then work out where I am in my pattern, because of course I wouldn't have written down or left a little mark of where I am in my pattern. So just having, they don't have to be coloured, but if you've just got a favourite stitch marker that you use, try and use that one for your beginning of your right side row. Another reason for using stitch markers is because I promise you, if you're new to crochet or knitting, it is just the simplest way to keep yourself right on your stitch count. That was a hard lesson that I learned at the very beginning of my crochet, and I ended up with like wonky donkey crochet that was coming out at one end and a little bit less on the other. I'm sure most of us have been there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the only, like Laura, you know, the only way to really keep it right is just use a stitch marker. Like, keep yourself right, keep your count, but you're far less likely to go wrong with your stitch count if you've marked off at the very least the beginning of both of your rows. And I cannot tell you enough how much this visual marker of different colours are just a very easy way of working out where you are in your pattern.
Yeah, and because crochet, it can be a lot harder to tell which is the right side and which is the wrong side, whereas in knitting, it's often a lot more obvious.
Yeah, it's a lot simpler. And then usually to keep my traffic light system going, and I really don't know where my favourite orange bulb pin has disappeared to. Possibly my cat might have something to do with that. I've got a white one here. So if I was place marking my stitch just to finish up for the night, go to bed, then I would just usually have an orange bulb pin there. So I know that's the middle point of my project. Really quick, that's where I'm at, that's where I'm going from. That's start of the right side, that's the start of the wrong side. It's just a really quick and easy visual method. Ignore this one for now. That's something to come back to on the future swatch. The other reason that I like ball pins, and this is a great tip for not just using them for stitch markers, but also using them as place markers. So this is a jumper that I'm working on, and I know that I need to do 10 decreases in this sleeve. So all I've done is pull together 10 different bulb pins. So I don't have to keep on counting all of my decreases. On every time I've done a decrease round, I will just take out one of these bulb pins and attach it to that decrease round. So again, I've got a visual marker. I don't need to keep on counting them because I know I can just go and get another bulb pin and another bulb pin. And when I've run out of bulb pins, I've done all of my decreases. Done. This works for knitting and it works for crochet, but it's such a simple way of keeping your counts right. But also, if you're anything like me, I just love that little dopamine hit of moving something forward. And it's such a simple thing, and it's only a ball pin, but it's like my tick box brain goes, and another one done, and another one done. And it keeps me motoring through a project quite easily. Now, this doesn't just work for sleeves. You could be working on a 100 row crochet blanket. Get yourself 10 bulb pins ready to go, and every 10 rows, every 5 rows, whatever you need for that dopamine hit, just get another bulb pin off, and you will see this reduce, and the ones that are in your work keep on increasing, and it makes such a difference to being able to get through a project. That's
Amazing.
enough of my love affair, I think, of bulb pins. But they're the thing that I've got more than anything else in my Notions tin, and I can't tell you how happy I am when I get a piece of clothing and it's got a bulb pin on it. I'm like, oh, and it's a different colour that I don't already own. Yay! It's ridiculous. Right, let's get the jumper away because we have done with that one. We are on to, and this one is really interesting. Can I get a hands up if anybody self-taught themselves crochet from YouTube? I'd love to kind of get a feel for how many of you did. Laura, you can see more people than I can.
Yeah, there's a few, not loads.
Okay. And whether you were self-taught or not, do you know the difference between a yarn over and a yarn under, and the difference it makes to your fabric and the look of your stitches. Yep, TL Yarn Crafts has got a great thing on this, and you were taught by them. Fantastic. Right, let me show you. Let me get my proper little swatch back. And again, this is in the blog post that I can show you. But if I show you with a, let's stick to a half treble because I really like a half treble. Now, if you are doing it the standard way, the vast majority of crocheters do, when you do a yarn over, your yarn is going up and over your hook, under and right to the back. And that basically means that your yarn over is almost the full circumference of your hook when you come to use it for your next pull through. So again, my stitch has gone through and I am up and over my hook, under and to the back, and I'm pulling that stitch through. And of course, I'm making sure that I'm riding it and not yanking it and not being loosey-goosey. And again, yarn over and up to the back of my hook. So it's always going from the back to the front, up and over my hook, under and right to the back. And that is creating that lovely stitch because I'm using almost the full circumference of my hook every time I do a yarn over or a yarn around hook. And I think this is a little bit about the terminology. It would almost be more helpful for designers, myself included, to say it's a yarn over, which means something entirely different in knitting, rather than a yarn around hook, because a yarn around hook could also be taken to mean this, which would mean that instead of going up and under, you would bring it from the back to the front underneath your hook, and then you would place your hook through the stitch. Now, what that means is that yarn has barely travelled at all. And that is a yarn under. And if you're doing a yarn under consistently, and the reason I've chosen a half treble is because it's a little bit different, because your second yarn around hook, if you're continuing to yarn under, would go from the front to the back under your hook. And again, it has barely travelled. You can see how hard that is to get it through. I'll do that again. So I've yarn undered, gone through the stitch, I've yarn undered, up and through. That's really, really tight. And if I yarn under again, it's hard to get that through, and I have to pinch it between my thumb and my index finger to get it through. And what I've got is a much smaller, tighter stitch. Can I just ask, does anybody in the room think they might be doing yarn unders rather than yarn overs, or is anybody not sure? Put your hand up so Laura can see them. I mean, full marks if you are all doing yarn overs for sure.
Yeah, there's a couple of hands up. I'm trying to picture my own crochet in my head, and I think I do yarn over.
Yeah. So, and I've seen somebody, Nadia, you think you alternate. If you're alternating, that's going to be one of the reasons you might struggle to get tension, because you're going to have like a tight bit and a loose bit in your crochet. And if you can just stick to one, that would be great. But let me show you why. Let me show you the difference that it makes. And again, there is a full blog post supporting this. But if I always stick to yarn over on the left, yarn under on the right, look at the difference in that tension. Same number of stitches, same number of rows.
Wow.
And not only does it make a difference to the gauge in row, it also makes a difference to the width of your stitch, because you have got so little yarn that you're pulling through with the yarn over. So this is with double crochet, which is single crochet in US. Let me quickly show you how it looks in the round. Exactly the same number of rounds and stitches, massively different type of stitch that you're getting. It looks the same, but your gauge is completely different. This is really handy. The yarn under double crochet, single crochet is really handy for amigurumi, because it's a much denser fabric that doesn't show holes, that is perfect for amigurumi. You won't see stuffing coming through this because it is so dense. Now, let me quickly show you that also for half treble, which is a half double in US. There's your rows. So again, your stitches are narrower, and your row gauge is different, and exactly the same for in the round. So you are essentially creating completely different stitches. And the other things that you can see is it looks like a slightly different stitch as well. You get this vertical bar that starts to form with it. And with half treble in rows, one of the real design features half treble in rows is you get these horizontal bars that run right the way across each of your rows. And when you do a yarn under, you don't get that same effect. So you can start to see how you can deploy something slightly different just within the anatomy of your stitch can create what looks like a completely different stitch. So if you were wanting to start designing, this could be a really interesting way of bringing a different design element to your crochet. So for instance, a bag using half treble would make a really interesting looking bag. It's not going to be suitable for everything because there's a lot less drape to it compared to like the standard yarn over because it uses so much more yarn.
Faye,
Yeah.
is it possible for you to demonstrate the yarn over and yarn under with the yarn coming from your left hand? I think a few people have asked because they're struggling to sort of know if they do it right because
Right.
your hands are the not wrong way around.
Yes.
There's no
Tell
wrong
you
way around.
what, the best thing that I can probably do is take some photos of it as part of the blog post and flip the image, but it should essentially be the same. Let me just, because I'm so very not left-handed, but it would be the same thing. So whatever is creating the circumference around your hook. So if I was doing yarn under, I would be going from the back to the front underneath the hook. And if I was doing a yarn over as a left-hander, I would be coming from the back to the front, up and over the hook, under the hook at the back, and right round to the back. But basically look at how much the yarn is traveling and that will give you the answer. So as a left-hander, and I hope I've got this right because I'm very much, there's no ambidextrous in me at all. I am very much a right-hander. But basically look at how far your yarn is traveling. So if it's your yarn under, it is literally coming under the hook. And if it's your yarn under, it is going from the back, up, over, under, and to the back. And that is different. You can see how much more yarn is being used for each pull up of a stitch.
And it creates the diagonal is a different direction on the hook.
Yeah.
As it goes round. That's what I was trying to look at was which way it was.
Yeah.
Are you able, sorry, to hold your hook in your right hand,
but
have the yarn coming from your left hand?
Yeah, let me try.
Sorry.
Not a continental knitter, but let me try for you. So again, if this was for a yarn under, it's exactly the same thing. So your yarn would be going, let me think about this. Let me make sure it's the same. Yeah. So it'd be going under.
Yeah.
Hook would be going through the stitch and you'd be going under from there. But you can see how tight it is.
Yeah.
And it's really tight to get through. And then you'd be going under again and pulling it through. But you can see that I naturally wanted to go over and scoop it. Yeah. So I think the main thing is to remember the terminology, that what you want is a yarn over. So whether you're coming from the front to the back or the back to the front, you want your hook to come over because that's creating the circumference of yarn around your hook. If you're going under, you don't have that circumference and you just have your tight stitches. So the thing to remember is yarn over, yarn over, yarn over, yarn over, yarn over.
Yeah.
Unless the designer has told you yarn under, which they may have done for amigurumi. I know that there was a design in Murat magazine which was based on yarn unders, which is what sparked this piece of work that I did a couple of years ago. So this is why I know so much about yarn unders and how important it is.
I feel like it's something we've probably all done sort of accidentally without thinking about it and then gone, oh, why did that stitch feel weird?
Yeah. And I think especially if you're self-taught through books or through YouTube, and if they weren't talking about the anatomy of a stitch, then how would you ever know? I know that I was taught face to face, and I asked the person that taught me to crochet if it made a difference, and they said no. And it absolutely does. Like, it makes such a profound difference to your crochet at the end. And this one really shows that. This is treble, this is double crochet in US. Look, I know that's the wrong way up because look at my little knots, just to prove that I do this. Here we go. And I've got knots on this one as well. I'm such a good pupil. This is a treble crochet double in US. Look at the difference in your row heights there. And again, your stitch width is different as well. Same in the round. And look at this. These are completely different looking stitches in the round. And this is like a more general point, but how a crochet stitch looks in rows is completely different to how it looks on rounds, because the wrong side of your stitch in a row is what is in the inside of your tube in the round. And the right side of your stitch in a row is what is presented to the right side of your tube in the round. Does that make sense? It's a little difficult to get your head around, but you've got two different looking stitches on each row. And I'll show you, I've got some stitch anatomy stuff to share with you as well. But they look like two completely different stitches. So like I said, if you're thinking about designing, it takes a little while to get to grips with, but actually applying yarn unders gives you a whole new load of stitches in your crochet arsenal that you maybe didn't have before. And it creates something that can be used more for homewares, for bags, for, again, you could potentially amigurumi with this because it's a much denser weave on it. Like, there's all sorts of stuff that you can do with yarn under. So I'm not saying it's bad, but what I would recommend is that you check yourself and make sure that you are consistently doing yarn over if you can, because that is where the vast, like 99.999% of designers are doing yarn over. So make sure you're following what they think you're going to be doing.
Lovely. I think we've all taken note of that one.
Excellent.
All going to do a bit of crochet and go, okay.
Double check. Has anybody been crocheting while we've been doing it and checking?
Yes, I can see some of them in the videos, and also someone literally said that they had to do some crochet to check what they were doing while you were talking.
Oh, and we've got Nadia saying yes, and I'm in the middle of a project, so the incorrect process will have to work now. I mean, I'm a big fan, even though I'm a designer, I'm a big fan of just like winging it and like finagling a little bit, just because who's gonna know? Like, just do whatever looks good for you. As long as you're getting something that is close to where it should be, then nobody's going to know. The crochet police don't exist. They're not going to come knocking on your door and tell you you've done it wrongly. Right. Oh, we're flying through starting stitches. Let me show you this one quickly because this is a biggie. Most likely, when you were taught to crochet, you were taught to do turning chains. And I don't know why they're still being taught. I don't get it. And let me fly the flag for moving you over to starting stitches instead. If I come back to this swatch, I'll show you how to do each of them. But again, I've got a photo tutorial and a video tutorial on this for you. So I will go through them all maybe once or twice. But this is why I would love to move you over to starting stitches. A turning chain gives you this fingerful of a hole in every single side of your crochet, which makes it really hard to work into when you have to work into that turning chain when you come into it on the next row or the next round. It's always much more gappy than the other set of stitches, and it creates this horrible kind of bumpy texture down the side of your work. If there's one thing that I would love you all to step away from after this workshop, it's turning chains, and let me show you why. This entire swatch has been made using starting stitches, and you can see I've got much neater edges. I've got double crochets here, single in US. I've got half trebles here, half double in US, and I've got trebles here, which are doubles in US. And I've got nice, neat edges, and I don't have any of those big gaping holes that you get with turning chains. So let me just quickly whip down to the end of my swatch. And yep, please do have a look at how differently I crochet as I get there, because there are only a few of us, I think, in the world that crochet in this way. It's very different, but it is entirely what is comfortable for me. Right, I have just treble crocheted to the end of that swatch, and I'm not going to do turning chains, but I am going to turn my work. And to begin with, I'm going to show you a double crochet starting stitch, because then the half treble builds on that and the treble builds on that again. So if I was going to, usually you would do a chain one, and then you would crochet into that same first stitch. I don't want to do that because the chain one I think is problematic. So instead what I'm going to do is just raise that loop up a little, not too much, but essentially what I want that loop to be is the wall and the top of my stitch. So it does need to be extended a little bit. And then all I'm going to do is make a double crochet as I normally would. And to begin with, it might look a little bit loose, but can you see how that is acting as both the wall and the top of my stitch? So let me just put a couple of extra double crochets in so you can see how it looks in context. But you can see that the height is right. When I turn to come and work back into that stitch, I know exactly what I'm working into because I can see my front loop and my back loop. And you can see down here where I've already prepared it, that it's a really nice, neat transformation from the edge of your stitches, just using a simple starting double crochet rather than a chain one. This is a real game changer.
Yeah.
So let me quickly whip that back out, and let's pretend again I've just come to the end of that row, and I'm going to move on to a half treble row of stitches. So I'm turning my work. I'm not going to chain two, which is what I was taught to do for half treble crochet. And I'm going to again start with a starting double crochet. So I'm extending that loop a little. So I've got more working yarn. I'm going into that first stitch in the row, and I'm doing a double crochet. And then what I want to do is show you more of the stitch anatomy. So I'm going to loosen that off a little bit. Normally you would work into the top of the stitch, which has got your front loop and your back loop. But we all know that a double crochet is made up of a V when you're working it on the right side. And basically, instead of working into the front and the back loop to make my starting half treble crochet, I'm going to place my hook in the left leg of that V of my double crochet. So it's going in through here. So it's a little bit different and it takes a little while to get used to. So I'm ignoring the back loop, I'm ignoring the front loop, I'm looking at the very front of my double crochet. There's the left leg of the V, there's the right leg of the V, and I'm putting my hook straight in through the left leg on the front of my stitch. I'm going to tighten up that yarn a little bit. I'm going to do a yarn around hook, not under. And I'm going to pull through just one loop, on both loops on my hook. And that has created a starting stitch, which is the height of a half treble. You can see it's much thicker, so I'm not going to end up with, where have you gone? I'm not going to end up with this hole that I would get in a standard half treble with the 2 turning chain. I've just got a really nice thick stitch, which means that it's really easy to count when I come back on the other side because it's there. And if I come back to work a trim or a border into this, I've got a really nice thick stitch that I can start working into the side of rather than the other side of the post of that stitch. It's just a really neat system. So let me just do a couple more, again, half trebles, so that you can see how it looks in relation to the rest of the stitch. So I've done 1 starting stitch and 2 half trebles. And when I come back on, this is what I would be working into, is this starting stitch up at the top. For some reason, this has presented itself a little bit wobbly, but usually it would just look like a normal stitch with a front loop and a back loop that you'd be working into. And it's just, you can see It's creating a nice, neat vertical edge to it. It's much thicker. It's just a much nicer way of creating an edge stitch. Now, let me show you quickly how that would look for a treble starting stitch. And this is where my one differs slightly from other ones that you might see on the internet. Other ones involve wrapping your hook round a different way. And I just think, given that a treble is just one more yarn over from a half treble, why wouldn't you apply the same thing to a starting stitch? So exactly as we did with the first, you extend that loop a little and you do a starting double crochet. So that's yarn around hook, pull up a loop, yarn around hook, pull through both loops. And then exactly as you did with the starting half treble, the next stage is to put your hook through the left leg at the front of that stitch, yarn around hook, and I'm just pulling up a loop. Now instead of pulling through both, I'm just going to do yarn around hook, pull through one, and this is what extends it into a starting treble, yarn around hook, pull through two. And that has given me 3 turning chains worth of height. And there's the top of my stitch that I would be working into on the way back. I've always found that with turning chains, when you come to work the next row on top of them, they can be really tight. It's difficult to know where your stitch count is. And this just presents you with such a nice stitch to work into the top of, that it massively changes how you feel at the beginning and end of a row, because you know that you're making it as neat as you possibly can, basically. This is something that I would encourage you all to have a go at. Helena, if you're about, if you can, oh, you're still doing it, lovely. So Helena at 322 has just put the blog post link back up again. In there are links out to double crochet, half treble crochet and treble crochet photo tutorials and video tutorials for this stitch. And with my video tutorials, I try to keep them really short and sweet and to the point. You don't get like my life story in each video. I just tell you what you need to know to do the technique. Starting stitches are a real game changer, and I would encourage you, if you want to elevate your crochet, this is the best place that you can start at.
Yeah, that's amazing, because I think turning chains are the source of those wobbly edges in everyone's first crochet thing, because you can't tell what is the stitch and what's the chain at the beginning and end. And yeah, I know it's confused me a lot in the past.
Yeah, and it makes the whole experience a lot more pleasant. Tip number 10 is
we got to 10.
You got to 10. Woo! And look, pink means end of round. So this is something that I've been working on in the round. Normally, this is my first stitch, obviously, because it's marked with green. Normally, you would have been taught to have done a slip stitch to join that round together. Hands up, everybody. That's your standard way of joining a round? Yeah. So my next round on this is going to start with a half treble, but I'm going to use a starting half treble instead. So there's my first stitch. I'm not going to put a slip stitch into that. I'm going to do a starting half treble. So I'm extending that loop a little bit. I'm going to put my double crochet in there. My hook is going into the left leg at the front of that stitch. Yarn around hook, pull up a loop, yarn around hook and pull through both. And I have just joined my round with the starting half treble. You don't have an extra stitch in there. It doesn't make you question where you should be putting your hook into after, because what does the slip stitch count as? I have literally joined that round just with the next stitch of my next round. And if I put in, again, if I put in a couple of half trebles, you can see how it looks in relation to the rest of the round. And I'll show you an real up close, because I've used this method for every single one of my round joins for this square. So let's have a look. You can see that I've got the height that I need for my round start. You can see that my round has been joined without a big massive gap. And if you look down here really closely, and you have to look really closely to see it, this is me starting every single round with a starting half treble. You just wouldn't know it. And when you put it in context, let me just mix this up a little bit and bang it down, you'd be really hard pushed to see where that start is in your round join. And I think when you use a slip stitch for your round join and a turning chain, I think it creates a big gap, and I don't think it's as neat as using starting stitches for round joins is. And it's a bit unusual, and I only started using it about 18 months ago, but it really works. So again, something to play with that's a little bit different. You might prefer going back to a starting chain, a slip stitch and a turning chain. You might have a slightly neater way of doing it. I'd love to know if you do, but this honestly is what is working best for me, because I just, in the context of that square, I just don't think you can see where the round have been joined and restarted.
Yeah, it looks seamless, which
Yeah.
is really nice.
This is what I'm striving for, always seamless, flawless crochet.
Right, are we ready? I've got a few questions. There was one just popped up relative to what you've just said. If you're doing this starting stitch instead of a chain, how do you change colour when you're doing that?
So I would do it in exactly the same way that I would always change colour. Let me pull in another colour, which is, it doesn't matter what stitch I'm using, and let me show you this with a half treble again. So if I was changing colour into a starting stitch or any other colour, it would be on my final yarn around hook that I would change colour out, because it's your final yarn around hook that actually becomes the top of the next stitch. So if I was doing that, I don't need a slip knot on my hook. I can literally just add in another colour, loop it over, and my final yarn around hook and pull through is in that new colour. And there it is, ready at the top, ready to go. Let me put in another one so you can see how, again, how it looks in relation to the rest of the work. Yarn around hook and pull through all three. There's my colour change. Straight through. So it's always on the final yarn around hook that you do it.
Yeah.
Quick tip in that, if you're doing a lot of colour work, particularly with double crochet, if you really want to neaten it off and not have these V's showing at the front of your work, then after your colour change, start going into the back loop only instead. Let me do a couple so you can see what I mean. When you go into the back loop only, this is not the ideal way to show you it, but it will give you a much neater colour changeover from one round to the other, because the two V's, the bottom of them, kind of hide inside the stitch. So it can give you a lovely linear colour change line from one to the other. It might not work for all of the patterns, but if you were doing something like, say, a tapestry crochet bag or a colour work bag, then going into the back loop only, when you've got a colour change from one round colour to the next round colour, back loop only will give you a really neat colour change on it.
Cool, thank you. There's quite a few questions coming up. I'm not sure we'll get through all of them because we're running out of time. I'm going to ask one that came up earlier, and I've always wondered this. When you get to the end of a row and you turn your work, does it matter which way you turn your work? As in, do you turn the work clockwise or anti-clockwise, or do you...
So I can only speak as a right-handed crocheter, but I think it does, because I want to keep my yarn at the back, so I go clockwise.
I think I do too.
Because if I go anti-clockwise, what it does is it keeps your yarn to the front, and then you have to pull it to the back. Whereas if I go clockwise, it kind of keeps it at the back ready to work.
It's already in the right place.
So if, like, don't quote me on this, but therefore if you're a left-handed crocheter, I think you would want to go anti-clockwise to keep your yarn on the back, because you basically want to flip out and do the exact opposite. I think that's how it would work.
I think you're right. One actually Liz has just asked, related to this starting stitch. Are you basically starting with one loop fewer than the stitch you are actually working, then working the proper stitch into the front of the V? In other words, if you are working a treble crochet for the pattern, you would turn with a half treble, then work the treble into the front of the V. Does that make
No.
sense?
So you're, if I've got you right, you're always starting with the starting double crochet and then you're building height on top of that stitch. So where it would differ from your traditional turning chain is if I was doing let's say again a half treble or a treble, you would do your 2 chain or your 3 chain and then you would skip a stitch because that turning chain would be counted as your first stitch. With a starting half treble, treble double crochet, what your starting stitch is your first stitch, so you don't then have to skip any, and that is what is leading to your nice like vertical lines. I would encourage you, like for the sake of clarity, because it's quite hard to get this over in such a short period of time, I would definitely go to the blog post because I've got step-by-step photo tutorials in there. Like I'm really pedantic about how I present information, and you've got the video tutorial as well. So the photo tutorial also links to the video tutorial and the video one links to the photo one. So I've kind of got you covered in both, and those links are already live to that blog post. But I'm on Instagram. If you need me, then just like come and I will happily do bits and pieces on video on Instagram if anybody needs like more clarity. I'm very
Lovely.
helping crocheters.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff we'll all want to sort of watch again and go, oh yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that forever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
That's what I would hope is like honestly, the tips that I've given you give you a nice little storyline of starting to practicing through a project where you can just elevate your crochet really. And like as I said earlier, I'm always here for flying the flag for crochet, the underdog in the crafting world.
yeah. Amazing. I'm going to have to cut it short there because we've got our next session very shortly, so we have to
Yes.
prepare for that one. What I'll do, Faye, is make a note of the questions that we haven't got to, and maybe that'll be in next year's
And
virtual open weekend.
or like another blog post, my top
Yeah,
20 tips. Because
exactly.
I promise you, I have got 14 more that I didn't manage to get through.
There we go. We're all going to be following you now for all these tips to improve our crochet. Thank you so much. I think everyone's enjoyed it, getting lots of nice thank yous in the chat. I hope everyone, I'm pretty sure everyone's learned something new from that. Well done, Faye, and thanks very much. We'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you, everyone.
Bye.